Great. Hello, everybody. Just quickly tweeting that we're live. And yeah, I guess then we can get started. I mean, welcome. This is um 21 on, where we talk in 21 minutes about the most pressing topics related to Bitcoin. My name is Tycho. I run Bitcoin strategy at Treasury, an emerging Bitcoin treasury company, and yeah, I'm here with a good friend from the Bitcoin ecosystem, an Anon friend who is Farmer Joe. Um, but yeah, maybe you want to briefly introduce yourself. I mean, many of you know you from your Twitter handle and from your sort of spicy takes from be it the Bitcoin ecosystem, Bitcoin treasury companies, now more AI stocks. But yeah, maybe you just want to briefly introduce yourself for those who don't know you yet.
Sounds great. Yeah, thanks for having me, Tycho. Yeah, so backstory on myself, I've been in the crypto space, I guess before Bitcoin season two since 2017, 2018. But mostly I would say I guess I'm a trader, investor, hybrid combo influencer, across the board. I think, what got me excited back into Bitcoin in 2023 was ordinals and everything that was happening on the Bitcoin core side. And then that turned into Bitcoin staking with Babylon and Bitcoin L2s with many of the L2s that have launched and are yet to launch. But more recently, post DAT, have been excited about the AI boom, and that's largely where I'm personally invested right now. But still a very long-term believer of Bitcoin and all things Bitcoin, on chain, off chain, and so forth. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, so a flexible Bitcoiner, so to say. Maybe you just want to quickly run us through, like, when did you get started in Bitcoin, and then I guess also you kind of rose to fame, I guess, during the building on Bitcoin and ordinals moment, and but now you've kind of moved away from that a bit. So maybe we could just look a bit at the progression, and then pick from there the Bitcoin treasury companies versus AI stock piece.
Yeah, it's a good primer. I mean, crypto got me excited in 2017 or so, um, mostly on Ethereum. I just viewed Bitcoin as a pretty boring asset, and I guess I just never really understood it until 2022, 2023, when it was back to like 16 or 17K. It started to make sense to me again as a, sound money primitive. So it took me, I want to say like 4 or 5 years to really believe in Bitcoin as an asset itself. Prior to that, my area of interest was always about finance, TradFi, bringing assets on chain, programmability, and so forth. And so, from that respect, Ethereum was always a lot more exciting to me with the EVM, Solana afterwards with SVM and its performance capabilities. But yeah, I think what got me excited back in 2023 was ordinals and backing a lot of the early stage teams as an angel across the board. I think there's like 30 angel checks that I made, of varying degrees, across the board, from Bitcoin scaling, interoperability, Bitcoin wrappers, um, some marketplaces, yeah, just everything under the sun. So while I say that, well, you kind of introduced me as someone who's pivoted away from it, I'm still very much invested in the Bitcoin thesis. It's just AI right now is a little bit more exciting, and as a trader, it has quite a lot more volatility to it, which provides an opportunity to capitalize on it.
Mm. And when it comes to being a trader and you know liking volatility, I guess, did you get involved in the Bitcoin Treasury summer last year?
Yes and no. I mean, I have, through a couple of DATs, but again, I never really kind of grasped why they trade at a premium. And again, understanding them at large, helped me to grasp, like, oh, these velocity acquisition, vehicles, financial instruments. They're very well engineered in most cases. Financial instruments to acquire more Bitcoin, trade at a premium, trade at a forward of what they can acquire, and so forth. Um, I think the most exciting part more recently was how they've evolved. And so, still very much I'm excited for DATs, but as the landscape progresses and how, the capital structure and opportunity or arbitrage, to capture volatility in the market shifts, I'm really in tune with how MicroStrategy is using the stretch instrument and so forth.
Yeah, that makes sense. And if you think about your kind of current allocation, at the moment, or your current portfolio structure, are you buying the dip on treasury companies, or are you very invested in the AI side of things, and
Yeah, I mean,
or more of a passive holder?
I mean, passive now. Passive now because the boom and bust cycle of Bitcoin has seemed to play out. And so I always just viewed like when I'm trading on chain, I always just viewed my purpose is to just acquire more Bitcoin. Similar to like MicroStrategy, using premium to NAV to issue more stock to acquire more Bitcoin. I was using basically most of the trades have went into parking Bitcoin for the long haul. And right now it's about 50-50 between, how I'm split, still long Bitcoin from a spot perspective and some of the digital assets, NFTs that I end up holding. Angel checks are part of that. Some DAT holdings are part of that as well. And then the rest is largely in the semiconductor space. But yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I think generally speaking, Bitcoin will always has historically been cyclical, and it continues to be viewed that way. And so when you say buying the dip, yeah, I'm already fully invested. And so the question is like, when do I park all the gains from AI stock trading when the opportunity to me feels like it's too rich or overappreciated, and go back into just stacking and hodling more Bitcoin. I think the time hasn't come for me yet, but sure enough, that will happen. And if Bitcoin's 60K, 70K, 80K, I'm not really too concerned about that, because my long-term thesis is that Bitcoin as an asset class should be in the tens of trillions, and not the sub 2 trillion that it is right now. It should be, rivaling gold and some commodities, because it is just a better version of that.
Yeah. That's very interesting, because many people that we speak with, right, on this show, are obviously very interested also in this concept of outperforming Bitcoin, right? I mean, we had like Borja here from Roxxon, for example, right, who founded this kind of exchange where you can trade stocks denominated in Bitcoin, for Bitcoiners, with the idea that you can, essentially outperform Bitcoin or accumulate Bitcoin by making trades and making Bitcoin denominated trades. But it seems like most people in the Bitcoin, or like most Bitcoiners, are sort of trying to outperform Bitcoin, using treasury companies, or they're very deeply into that. Whereas you know, you're actually looking at it from quite a different angle, which is the AI trade. And I mean, to me, as maybe a bit more of a neutral observer, right, everything that's happening right now in semiconductors, memory stocks, feels a lot like the kind of Bitcoin 2021 type of feeling. Is that warranted, or
Yeah,
how do you perceive
absolutely.
it?
I think the parallels are so closely tied. Like, how people view these things, their long-term belief in AI and semiconductors, and the just massive explosion of volatility and outperformance against the broad market in that specific category. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of parallels to it. I'm not a believer in this up only AI is perpetually structural, and we're gonna just continuously buy more compute and so forth. I think there's a day where we're simply like we can't finance more of this compute, and I think the AI game theory is much more dramatic and complex than Bitcoin, which to me was always viewed as perception, inflows, and so forth. It's a much simpler asset
What do you mean by
because
the AI game theory?
oh
What do you
yeah,
mean
the
by
game
that?
theory of AI is yes, we have massive compute spend, but how much compute is actually needed, and when do we get an inflection point where AI starts replacing so many jobs that the net inflows of capital suffer and struggle because AI has replaced the modern middle class, upper middle class job society, which has historically been the driver of where the liquidity comes from. And so it's quite different than Bitcoin, but in a lot of ways, I think over the next couple of years it'll share a lot of the parallels to it as well, on the boom and bust side of things. Um, yeah, I think crypto's moment under the sun will come again, and we're nearing that pivotal moment, I think, in the next year.
Yeah. Yeah. No, okay, interesting. So you're seeing it. Okay, it's still hot in AI land. There's still gains to be made from these, I guess, rotations, but you feel it's somewhat late stage.
Yeah, I think it's very much late stage because it's all very much like sentiment driven, and most of the sentiment towards AI has been extremely favorable for I'd say the better part of a year post Claude, let's call it. Um, I think that was really the inflection point to usable AI or agentic AI, and I think the 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 inflection, like the to be a first mover to adopt some of this modern technology is always going to have the highest value. Um, and then there's a decaying return over time, just naturally as the markets seem to start to price things in, and society seems to price this modern revolution in to how we view it and use it.
So to get back into maybe an interesting question, right? So to get back into Bitcoin, are you looking for lower lows in Bitcoin or Bitcoin treasury companies, or are you looking for lower highs on the AI stock side?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't have an answer to you because I don't think the two will, converge where one starts to underperform and one starts to outperform. I think it's going to be a rotation from one to another in a very hedged way, let's call it. So I think, one, we could have AI stocks and the AI bubble continue to expand while having underperformance on the Bitcoin side, but we might also have the AI side continue to grow, and during that process have a resurgence of interest to things like Bitcoin and DATs by themselves. So I'm not looking for a deep discount price. Like if Bitcoin is at 50K, it doesn't mean that I'm excited about it again. I'm looking kind of for the first sign of renewed interest, use case adoption. And to be fair, like one of my hypotheses on this is maybe AI makes fiat a little bit like more redundant. And so what happens if,
Wait, can you say that one more time? I
some
think you're breaking up just there, but you said
oh
AI
yeah,
makes fiat a bit more.
redundant. Like AI could make fiat very legacy in a way. So one, it's maybe AI adopts some of these more modern financial assets and currencies. That's one hypothesis, and definitely another hypothesis as well. Will we have any sort of G7 or equivalent large kind of country have their fiat erode because of AI? And does that cause them to think about Bitcoin as a sovereign currency that they maybe adopt in the future? I don't know the right answer to that, but my hypothesis is that that's probably going to be the case for why crypto in general becomes more attractive as we
Yeah,
continuously
and
print
when
more
you
money
say
and so forth.
Yeah, when you say that, is it like, I mean, because there's a couple ways of looking at it, right? At this sort of, what's the relationship between, AI and hard money in the fiat world, right? One sort of thesis is like, oh, there's going to be this sort of proliferation of AI agents, and they're going to look for, payment methods and ways to store value, right? And they will use Bitcoin, and they will use crypto assets in general. Um, and then there's also, I guess, the other angle, which is, hey, if a lot of the sort of Western knowledge worker economy gets undermined, then we have huge problems with liquidity in the housing market, and kind of cascading of effects from an ever shrinking middle class, which lead to the political response of money printing, which leads to the political response of yeah, saving the big asset bubbles in our economy, and thereby eroding yeah, the fiat base.
Yeah,
Like, which of
purchasing
those
power.
two do you think it?
No, no, definitely,
Are
definitely the
you betting on
latter.
both?
Yeah,
Are you betting on one of those, or?
no, 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 no. I think, crypto payment rails for agentic AI make sense. But to me, like, maybe they just won't use Bitcoin, right? Like, we still don't have a great Bitcoin wrapper, and they're not going to use Ethereum. They're largely going to be, I mean, like, at the end of the day, humans control agentic AI, and companies will control agentic AI. And so what matters to them is you know, accumulating resources, which in their view is fiat, because that's how they pay their business dues. That's how they, keep their AI spend. And so until that shifts, I don't think that's a valid hypothesis. I'm more leaning towards the latter, where, all right, we get ourselves into this massive bubble. We continuously print an obscene amounts of money on a global basis. You have decaying economies across the G7, which have created a huge amount of regulation that, in most cases doesn't support AI compute and AI, replacement of workers. And so those countries by default to me are just going to lag those that do adopt it. And those are very large, countries in general with and so what happens when they don't pursue that? Well, they still have debt that accumulates, and they have decaying economies. Um, and so, yeah, it's more the latter of, will a major country have its fiat system completely eroded to bring awareness to sound money? I think that logic is a little bit more concrete, but I could be proven wrong.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. So you're a bit more on for the immediate future. Yeah, the sort of the classic Silicon Valley, San Francisco permanent underclass argument applied to countries, which would be a catalyst for Bitcoin, I suppose. And
Yeah, yeah,
um,
and that's a very doomer side of the equation. Like, I don't want to go down the path of, zero hedge, where, fiat systems and economies will collapse. The world would not really be in a better place because of that. But my fear towards that happening is consistently rising. And I think in most cases over the last 50 years, it's never been more warranted to be fearful of fiat erosion. And we see it in the bond market too. The 30-year bonds in the US are upwards of 5%, which implies that the long-term inflation rate of the US is going to exceed 5%, which has never happened. And what is the role of the Fed? The Fed now needs to change, and our total perception of fiat is shifting faster than anyone has predicted, because trust in the system is eroding, and it's bringing more credibility to sound money primitives. And just kind of why I thought we saw a massive run up in gold as the most legacy sound money primitive. But I think modern money is digitized, and Bitcoin is much more easily digitized than gold itself.
yeah, no, clear. I guess we have roughly 1 more minute. Um, where do Bitcoin treasury companies fit into this broader thesis?
Yeah, look, I think, ones that are very well run with lean teams themselves. At the end of the day, they're acting in the best interests of their shareholders. And so ones that do manage the treasury at a very low cost base are, in the best benefit of succeeding in the long run. I think those that gain credibility from bond rating agencies and create structured products like Stretch around their capital stack are, in a much better position to leverage the new and improved version of fundraising. And so I'm super excited that, we have Stretch and SATA. But I think, as we go down this path and as some DATs, start trading at a premium again, they might be at a sufficient size to start doing some of that behavior to shadowing the MicroStrategy strategy itself, or think of new innovative solutions that leverages, debt structures around their capital stack.
Awesome. Oh, great. We're at the 21-minute mark. So, just with Bitcoin, we have very limited supply of minutes on 21 on. But yeah, it was a pleasure to chat. I guess people can find more about you at Farmer Joe on X, right? Where
Yeah,
I
that's
guess
right.
you tweet
That's the
daily
best
about your
place.
positioning. So
Yeah,
if
sometimes
anyone wants to
more than
stay
once.
up to date, yeah, yeah, yeah. So if anyone wants to
Thanks
stay
again
up
for
to
having
date on
me.
your portfolio, but yeah, it was really great to talk, and yeah, that was 21 on. We'll be back next week, or rather, that's King, CEO of Treasury, will be back with another episode of Treasury Forum, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with another 21 on, where yeah, we discuss the pressing topics of Bitcoin in 21 minutes. So, but yeah, thanks very much for joining, and yeah, it was a good one.